In this devotional, I'm going to share with you 3 thoughts from Nehemiah 13, verses 15 through 18, where I'll ask the question, why didn't Israel honor the Sabbath? Nehemiah 13, verses 15 through 18 says, "In those days I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in heaps of grain, and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day when they sold food. Tyrians also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah in Jerusalem itself. Then I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, 'What is this evil thing that you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act in this way, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath.'" The command to honor the Sabbath is one of the defining commands for the people of Israel. They are supposed to be different from the nations around them, and one of those ways that they're different is to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. Because in honoring the Sabbath, you are reflecting God's own action of resting after working for 6 days. In honoring the Sabbath, you are attributing to God honor and glory, and also trusting in Him that He will provide for you the things that you need. It was one of those laws that made a distinction between the people of Israel and the nations around her. And when the people of Israel start to dishonor the Sabbath, when they start to profane the Sabbath, it removes that very significant distinction between them and the other people. With that in mind, here are 3 thoughts from Nehemiah 13, verses 15 through 18, answering the question, why didn't Israel honor the Sabbath? Thought number 1, bad examples. Israel had some bad examples. And in Nehemiah, we're talking about post-exilic time period. So this is after they had returned from the great disaster of being conquered by the Babylonians. And even when they had returned from exile, when they had gone back and they had rebuilt the walls of the city, they had worship reestablished, even then, the people of Israel weren't properly honoring the Sabbath. And the reason why is because all the nations around them weren't honoring the Sabbath. The people who were there with them, the Tyrians, they weren't honoring the Sabbath. They were working on the Sabbath instead of using it as a special day for worship and for rest. Not only that, but they had the bad examples of their forefathers too. They were following their example of dishonoring the Sabbath and doing what they liked instead of what God had commanded. Well, these bad examples ended up being a snare for the returning people of Israel. Thought number 2, greed. The people of Israel weren't honoring the Sabbath because there was another day to make money. And this is something that I think all of us can identify with. We all understand that there is a need for us to make money. We have to provide for ourselves, for our family. In fact, it's a requirement for us to provide for our families. We're not doing our job as parents, as husbands, as wives, if we're not providing for the family and meeting the needs that we have. But there's a difference between providing for your family and engaging in greed. It seems like the people of Israel were engaging in business on the Sabbath because they wanted to line their pockets. It wasn't that they didn't have enough for themselves. It was that they wanted more than they had. They ultimately wanted more than the Lord was blessing them with. And we should be careful not to fall into that same trap. We should be careful to identify that the Lord will provide for us that which we need, but He might not be giving us all of the little things that we want. So we have to protect ourselves against the temptation of greed, because once we are tempted to seek after more material wealth, then we're tempted to gather those things in any way possible, regardless of if we're dishonoring the Sabbath or not. Thought number 3, doubt. The reason the Sabbath exists, it seems, is to force the people into trusting the Lord. You trust that the Lord is going to provide you for the things that you need by working the 6 days and resting on the 7th. This is following the creation account, but it's also building in trust in the Lord to your everyday life. So the idea is simple. You work on 6 days. You work hard and you make sure that you are doing your best to provide for yourself, for your family, But then on the seventh day, you rest, you lay off of work, you honor the Lord on that day and worship Him on that day, trusting that God is going to provide for you. Ultimately, if you're profaning the Sabbath, you are doubting that the Lord is going to provide for you that which you need. If you feel like I absolutely have to work on this day, I can't follow the 6-in-1 formula that's given to us in Genesis. It's a part of the creation narrative, but you feel like you have to work more than that. Ultimately, you're doubting God. You're doubting that God is going to provide for you that which you need. And we should be hesitant to do that. Instead, we should trust God. Trust that He is going to provide for us the things that we need, and believe that He is ultimately working out His purposes in the world for His glory and for our ultimate good. These three thoughts come from the assigned reading of Nehemiah chapters 10 through 13. If you'd like to read through the Bible with me, you can do so by subscribing to this channel, by clicking on the link in the description, or by joining the Facebook group Through the Bible, where we are reading the text of Scripture together.